Hi guys, this is the quick tutorial that I'm going to be throwing out. This one's going to be covering how to create pipes, ropes and other kind of long bendy assets using curves. So you can see here we've got an example of a rope or a pipe or whatever you want to, or a wire using a really simple technique using curves, and then we're going to do a simple extrusion across it, and then we can create something that's got a lot of definition, a lot of subdivisions, and gives us a really nice visual effect, placing inside our games or our animations or inside our VFX situations. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to get a new scene. Make sure my grid's turned on. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to create, then get down to curve tools, and then these are all the different curve types I can create. They all create the same curve, it's just different ways of creating that curve. So we've got a CV curve, which is a very strict regimented curve, an EP curve, which is a very free-flowing, a Bezier, a pencil curve, 3-point circular and 2-point circular. I'd recommend just trying each one of these out, just seeing which one you like, and you can see what sort of roles they will be good for. I'm going to use CV curve because I find I get a really nice bend off this, and my curve is very neat. So I'm going to start putting down some curves, and I'm going to think this is going to be a wire that's going to be on the floor of a room. So I've got my curve just laid out nicely, and I can go in there with my control points. I can start just messing stuff around. So you can see I've got a lot of clustered area around here, and then I've got a lot of wide open space around here. So I'm going to start evening out that. Because we want to try and get this as equal as possible, but still maintaining a really nice curve. Because the more points you have clustered around one area, the less influence over a greater area is given to us. Okay, so that's about right. Let me move this one up here a little bit. So that's our curve. There we go. And if I go to my control points, control vertex, I can see that I've got these two pieces here. I've got a square and I've got a U shape. This basically dictates what was the very first point I put down, and this one's very important because we have to use that one, and the very end point doesn't have a shape applied to it. It's just got your standard control dot. The only difference with this one is it actually sits on the curve itself, where these other ones are approximations of the curve. So with my curve made, I'm going to go and make a cylinder. Now we can use any shape to extrude across this, but I'm going to make a cylinder just because I want this to be a circular cylindrical wire. So I'm going to shift and drag out my curve, my cylinder, sorry, like that, and I'm actually going to bump down the divisions down to a 10, because remember this is going to be a game, maybe 12 in fact. Remember, this is going to be in a game situation, so I want to make sure that my poly count is not too much, as we want to make sure, because we can imply a lot of high resolution texturing, which can cover a lot of the low polygon assets, and trick the player into thinking that it's a high resolution asset. So I'm going to take all the bottom faces off, all these faces down here. I'm going to take them off, so I'm just left with this top cap. So first things first, I'm gonna, now that I've pressed W, you can see that our manipulator isn't in the middle. That's because it's still got the memory of this shape. So we need to tell it to realign to the center here by just going to modify, center pivot, boom. Now with object mode selected, we want to snap this object to our curve. If we hold C for curve, and this needs to be in object mode to work properly. It can still be a little bit finicky at times, but so I'm going to move it over to the end of my curve. Remember that I want these two. I want this square. That's where we need to start building our pipe from, or our asset from. So I'm going to go to transform mode with W, hold C, and I'm just going to, there you go, So holding C, I just click off and click until it grabs the curve. You can see there, it's as I move it around, it's sticking to the curve. There you go. And then I'm just going to align it. I'm going to hold J because that then lets me snap in 15-degree increments. And I'm going to align so the actual normal faces, the grey faces, are facing in the direction our curve is flowing. If we did it the other way, where the black faces were going down the curve, then it would basically flip the normals inside out, which isn't a big problem because we can just easily re-flip those to face outwards. But for now, you know, it's a speed thing. We don't want to be. We want to take as many steps out as possible. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that looks like a pretty nice size. So I'm going to go to face mode, double click my little disc so that all the faces are selected, and then I'm going to shift click the curve. So I've got the faces selected, and then I've shift click the curve to select that as well. Then I'm going to go to extrude like that. So that then builds one division from the very first point. That's why we needed that to align to that very first point, that square dot, and it traces all the way down the curve and then draws a new face, draws an extrusion to the very last point of our curve. Now we do get this at first, and this is what's meant to happen because we've only got one division and you can't bend a wireframe, you can't bend an edge. So we just up the divisions, and you can see as we up the divisions we start to snap to our curve. By default this menu can only let you scrub to 25, but we can manually input the amount that we want. So I've just put 100 in there. You can see that's a very, very smooth line. I'm going to put 75, see what happens. Because again, polygon economy is a bit of a concern of ours. We want to make sure that we're not overdoing it. And I can say that right, so that's looking good. Now that might be our curve made perfectly. But then you might be thinking, oh well, actually the shape's not quite right. So if we go to wireframe mode, you can see if I click on the actual wireframe, you'll be able to see we've still got the blue line inside. That's our curve. So if I click that curve, hold on right click, we can then start affecting. I'll turn on. Yep. We can then start affecting our geometry after the fact. So once we put down our curve, we're not stuck with that and then we have to draw out another curve. We can go in and start to refine it just a little bit. If the curve is completely wrong, you probably will have to redo the curve, because as we're moving these around, we're also moving the edge flow. It isn't actively repositioning edges for us. We have to be aware that we are pulling. If we pull too much, you know, we're going to be pulling these edges and making quite an unattractive, not a very nice looking corner. So we need to make sure that we're just doing the fine tweaks if we need to, and then if we need to make the big rearrangements, we need to remake the curve. But I'm thinking that looks pretty good. Okay. Oh, that's better. Now the only problem with this is that we're not given any UVs, because it still maintains the UVs from when we first made the actual cylinder, which we were only left with this top cap. So that's all we've got left, unfortunately. Unwrapping the UVs isn't a major, it's a bit of a pain because we have to unwrap the UVs, but it's not a major task. If we were to build these out of NURBS, it would give us our UVs for us, but that's a longer process and it's a bit more of a pain to get everything looking quite right with NURBS. And in the game world, we don't use NURBS inside a game engine. If we're ever going to use them, it'll only be to build something. So I can do something like let's say a planar unwrap from the top. I can then go in and just cut my edges. In a real game situation, you'd probably have a person doing, like in a larger studio, you probably have a person dedicated to doing this, where they would, their whole job would be to make UVs that work. I'm just doing an approximation. So I've got my UV sets, and I've cut down the middle, and then I might just see what happens with an unfold. Try a new tool. There we go. And then you might have something like a bespoke square texture map laid out, which would be like a repeating pattern going across this surface. So then you'd know you'd have to lay out the UVs according to that. But that's quite simply it. You've got your pipe laid out. The only thing we have left to do now is to separate this away from the curve, because if we could move the geometry out of the way, but this curve, if we delete it, it still is applied to our curve, to our geometry. So we need to separate it so it has no more influence over this curve anymore. So I'm going to select the object itself, go up to delete, and by type history, and then when I delete that curve, our geometry is left over. So this is now a naked piece of geometry with no influences anywhere that we can start to then change if we need to. And you can do this same process with lots of different setups and lots of different shapes to create whatever sort of shapes you want. So with just a little bit of time spent, I've been able to create these 3 examples of how curves can be used. I've got this example on the right, which is using the curve as a kind of like a track to animate across of. So I've just got this cube kind of making its way across this perfect half circle. I've done a really simple, just like we did with the animation, just like we did with the circle with the little disc. I've just made like a little pyramid snake thing, and then using 4 discs and the twist function inside your extrusion, I've been able to make this rope. Now the rope is not a game asset at all. It's not going. This will not work inside a game engine because it's just, well, it will, but it's going to be very high demanding. But for the animation people and the VFX people, this is a perfect way of making rope. And again, it's very manipulatable after the fact. Once you grab your curve, yep, you can then go in and start to alter your rope very easily, just like that. Power of curves. So look into curves. Curves are incredibly vital, are incredibly usable. They're not just a way to make shapes. They can be used to define animation paths. They can be used to generate shapes that are quite hard to make inside Maya without lots of time spent messing with polygons and stuff. Cool. Right, that's tutorial 1 done.